So if you've watched American Horror Story, then you're probably familiar with Delphine LaLaurie. She was played in that show by the wonderful Kathy Bates, who really does an amazing job playing crazy psycho people. But even the great Kathy Bates doesn't really do justice to the historical Madame Delphine LaLaurie, very much a real person, our most reviled and probably most prolific serial killer. Now, she was born in 1775, very much with a silver spoon in her mouth, to a very wealthy family, the McCarthys. They married her off at age 25 to a much older man, a very powerful man. His name was Don Ramon de Lopez, and he was Spain's consul general to Louisiana. Now, 4 years into their marriage, they were in Havana, en route to Spain, having a nice soup dinner, when all of a sudden, Don Ramon clutched his chest, keeled over, and died. Well, a couple years after this, Delphine married again to a much older man, this time a Frenchman, and his name was, Jean Blanc. It was Jean Blanc. I'm sorry, guys, I don't know what happened there. I must have drawn a blanc on his name. So, about 4 years into their marriage, Delphine and Jean Blanc were right here in New Orleans having a nice chicken dinner. Whether it was fried or grilled, we simply don't know. It's one of those enduring mysteries of the historical record, when all of a sudden Jean Blanc clutched his chest, keeled over, and died. Well, a couple years after this, Delphine married a third time. Not to a much older man, but now to a much younger one. 25-year-old Louis LaLaurie. He was fresh off the boat from Paris, where he had just graduated last in his class from medical school. Still a doctor. Now here's a little bit of natural history of Louisiana for you. Because Delphine was pushing 50 at the time of this marriage, and Louis was only in his 20s, we do remember it here in Louisiana as our very first recorded cougar attack. It's a true story. So you might think that Louis then clutched his chest and died or whatever, but actually he lived. He lived a long and happy life. He and Delphine popped out a couple of kids. They moved into the luxurious mansion on this corner. Looked a lot different back then. It was 2 stories, not 3, and had a sort of a sloped roof, and it was green. But it was just as opulent, just as extravagant. And they quickly got this reputation as some of the most, the coolest socialites in town, the most influential socialites in town. However, despite the fact that it seemed like they were at the pitch of prosperity, ugly rumors surrounded the family about their cruel treatment of their slaves. Now, around this time, in a wealthy urban home such as this, you typically find around 6 to 8 slaves. Delphine had upwards of 26 slaves at any given time, which, even by the standards of the day, is just insane. It's just impractical, I mean, that's like small plantation numbers. There's no reason for these people to have that many slaves in a house in the city. So that was really weird. But what made it downright suspicious was that guests at the LaLauries never saw the same slaves twice. Now, Delphine, she would laugh this off. She would be like, oh, well, I leased them out to friends in the country and so forth. But nobody bought it, and the rumors just snowballed from there. They would be confirmed, and sadly, much, much more, on the night of April the 11th, 1834. It was during one of Delphine and Louis's wild parties, when all of a sudden the kitchen caught fire. Now, Delphine and Louis, being immensely wealthy as they were, really didn't let this bother them too much. They just ushered their guests out onto the pavement, where they watched the flames over a glass of Chateau de Chasselet. Well, fire brigade arrives, they put out the blaze, and they trace its source to the stove. And y'all, chained to the stove was a 75-year-old woman. Once they woke her up, she said, I did it. I started that fire. They said, what are you, crazy? They're going to string you up. She says, I hope they do. Anything is better than life with that woman. Never take me back to her, and never make me go into that back room ever again. Firemen were a little confused by this. They were just like, well, what are you talking about? What back room? She says, go up to the slave quarters and see for yourselves. So they do. They got to make a routine, check of the house anyway. And so they go up to the slave quarters, which is directly above where the kitchen used to be, and they do indeed find a back door that's been very cleverly hidden and very securely locked. So they shout down to Louis, down on the street here from the balcony. They say, hey, Louis, you got the key? And Louis's like, ooh, got the key somewhere on me, but I really don't see why you need to get into that room. Well, the firemen disagreed. They could think of several reasons to get into that back room, not the least of which was that they strongly suspected that somebody was still alive in there. Well, these were firemen after all. They did not need keys. They were just asking to be polite. They broke down the door with their axes, and what they found shocked the entire city. Now, these guys are pretty tough, right? I mean, 19th century firemen, gotta be pretty tough to do this job. It's the age before fire retardant suits, and no disrespect at all to modern day firemen, but these guys, their living was to run into burning buildings in their shirt sleeves, Gotta be pretty tough to do this job, and I'm sure they've seen a lot of burn wounds, suffered a couple themselves, these guys are no stranger to carnage. But when they knocked down that door, and the smell of what was inside started wafting out at them, half of these tough dudes got on their knees and started retching. It was a torture chamber, and inside they found 6 men hanging suspended from the ceiling by hooks barbed into their chests. they found a 3x3x3 wooden box, and inside a little girl had been stuffed unceremoniously, her bones broken and contorted to fit into that small space. They found a man with a head wound that was so far gone that maggots were crawling around in his brain. Now, since maggots actually clean wounds from infection, it was probably the only thing keeping him alive at that point. None of these people lived very long, but they did live long enough to be taken from that place and brought down here onto the intersection, where they were presented before a crowd that was gathering, a crowd of mostly dinner party guests, who had until that moment been toasting Delphine's health. Now, they turned into an angry mob, howling for her blood. They stormed the house and completely destroyed it, turned it upside down, but they did not find Delphine and Louis. In the chaos, knowing full well what was behind that back door, they decided to gather up their kids and skip town, hiring out a carriage man passing on Royal Street here to take them far to the north, to the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. From there, they were able to catch a ship to New York City, and once in New York, they hopped on the first ship bound for Paris. Now, folks, I wish I could say that the long arm of the law eventually caught up with these two, but that would be a lie. They lived in Paris with Louis' relatives in happiness and luxury for the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, the house here in New Orleans stood derelict. Nobody would go in. People said it was haunted and cursed. But about a generation after this, people just started to forget about these old stories. A lot of immigrants were coming to town around that time, a lot of Sicilians especially, working down at the docks. For a while, the French Quarter here was an ethnic Italian neighborhood. And a lot of these big sort of antebellum mansions here in the French Quarter, which were pretty much just collecting dust after the Civil War, were bought up and renovated and divided up into apartments. One of the families that moved in here around this time was made up of a husband, a wife, and an infant boy. The husband was a dock worker. The husband woke up in the middle of the night one night in 1885 to see his wife standing over the baby's crib. And in a moment of paternal pride, he said, "Oh, darling, you look so beautiful with our son. Come back to bed. Come back to me." Well, his wife, lying in bed next to him, said, "Who are you talking to?" He looked back. This woman wasn't his wife. He chased the apparition into the hallway where it disappeared, and then he heard his wife screaming. So he went back into the bedroom, only to find that the baby's sock had been stuffed this far down his throat. The Italians moved out within the week. And ever since then, nobody's been able to hold on to this place for more than about 8 years. It's said when you first move in that you're approached by warning spirits of some kind, presumably the ghosts of Delphine's victims, who will tell you to leave the house before it's too late. Because should you stay for longer than 8 years for whatever reason, then those undeniably frightening but more benign ghosts disappear. And they're replaced by others. And once they show up, nobody stays in the house for long. Now, this has been all sorts of things over the years, a high school, a music school, even a bar. And that's creepy. And they've all had to close their doors. Frankly, that's scary enough on its own. A bar going out of business in this neighborhood, my God. Nobody's been able to hold on to this place, not even a man that we all know. A man without whose hard work and dedication we would not have such classic motion pictures as Raising Arizona, Con Air, Drive Angry 3D, Face Off, and of course the greatest film about New Orleans ever made, and if you've been watching these for a while, you will know that I'm not being sarcastic. Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. Yes, this was once the residence, or at least the property, of actor Nicolas Cage. He lost this property, however, as well as his mansion uptown, due to what paranormal experts call tax evasion. He did not pay his taxes, so IRS took a bunch of his assets away. His only property left in the city is his tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Big pyramid. It's pretty awesome. Guy who owns it now is a real nice guy. He's an oil executive out of Houston. I've met him a couple times, just sort of, creeping around down here as I do. However, this 2019 will be year 8. So I'd be very curious to know what's going on in that house right now. Now, we're almost at the end here, but I just want to leave you guys with a warning if you ever end up here in the French Quarter here at this intersection around the LaLaurie mansion. This is a place where a lot of strange things tend to happen. I've seen it. I've seen people trip and fall. Sober people. I've seen electronics stop working inexplicably. People get into fights here a lot. French Quarter is a pretty Wild West place, but for whatever reason, it's always this intersection where I always see, hobos and junkies and drunks really going at it, man. This mansion just has a bad vibe. And a lot of locals just avoid it entirely. However, because this deli, directly to my right, the Verde Mart, is an absolutely fantastic place to get a sandwich, sometimes it simply cannot be avoided. In that case, they will take special care not to make the mistake that many do, and walk directly beneath the gallery of the LaLaurie mansion. It's said that should you linger there too long, especially beneath the old slave quarters where the garage is today, then something will follow you home. Well, that was the story of the LaLaurie mansion. Like all good French Quarter ghost stories, it's a mixture of history, folklore, and shit tour guides made up. Hope you enjoyed.
When the legend becomes fact, print the legend.